Tonight I figured we'd start at the beginning with the beginning of life issues that revolve around technologically assisted procreation. Okay? So what I want to do just to start with is that this is still front page news. Now this was a Time magazine article or a Newsweek piece that was taken off of a series of billboards that were run in New York City some time ago by a group of obstetricians, reproductive endocrinologists, infertility specialists who were becoming more and more troubled by the number of women who were waiting very late in life, into their late 30s and 40s, to begin trying to have a family and expecting medicine to produce miracles for them. And the physicians wanted to make some sort of public statement to say, basically, we are not medical miracle workers. And so they put out a series of billboards that went on buses and park benches and things like that. And they were absolutely castigated by the community for, how dare you tell us about how we ought to be living our lives? And they said, actually, to be honest, we're doing nothing of the sort. This is just the facts. Yeah. Because the longer we wait, typically, the more difficult it becomes to conceive a child. And the sort of the big idea on this is that, MD, when it comes to infertility specialist, does not stand for Master of Deity, right? Although you'd never know that by some infertility physicians. But it is not, they are not medical miracle workers. And once you start bumping up against some limits, the success rate for many of these technologically assisted reproductive methods is actually somewhat low. So in vitro fertilization, for example, has roughly a 25 to 30% success rate. And that has held pretty steady over the last 10 to 15 years. Okay, so roughly 1 in 3 to 1 in 4 couples will come to an IVF clinic, drop anywhere from $12,000 to $15,000 and walk away empty-handed. Okay? Now that's one of a number of sort of little-known facts about the infertility industry that we'll try and expose. The immediate concern for this is that we talk about the moral issues involved, because my guess is in our churches, my guess is that most people in our churches who undergo IVF and other technologically assisted programs have no idea of the moral quagmire that they've just stepped into. Because generally, what couples at this phase of life, what they care most about is the success rate and the cost. And I can't tell you how many couples I've had call me to say, we've just went through IVF, we're done having children, and we have 5 embryos left in storage. What do we do? And I say, I wish we would have had this conversation at the beginning and not the end, when, figuratively speaking, the horse is already out of the barn. Okay? So the goal for tonight is to give you the tools to have this moral discussion with couples who are contemplating going down this road. Right? And it would be a huge achievement if at the end of our time tonight you would feel confident enough to see yourself as a resource person for your church or the people that you have in your particular sphere of influence on this. All right? Now, one resource that's forthcoming on this is a book that will be released in February of 2011 called Outside the Womb, subtitled Moral Guidance on Assisted Reproduction, published by Moody Press. Dr. Joy Riley and I have done this together, and it's an update of a book that I published about 15 years ago on these technologies. But 15 years ago is a lifetime ago, given all the technological changes that have occurred. So that will be out. I'd encourage you to look for that when it comes out, because that's the kind of thing that you can give to a friend or give to an infertile couple, and they'll find it a helpful resource. All right? Now, I'm going to put you guys on the hot seat here for just a minute. You are the pastor of family ministries in your particular church. Okay? And you have, sitting across the table from you, is a couple who have been married for about 6 years. They've been trying unsuccessfully for the last 3 years to have a child. Okay? They have just returned from visiting the local infertility clinic for a consultation. And now they are coming to you to help them sort out everything that they've just been told. Okay? They have a mind-numbing array of options in front of them that is more alphabet soup than they know what to do with. And so what they want to know is which of these technological options fits within the parameters of Scripture. Okay? Now, what would you tell them about the options that are available to them? All right? I'm going to give you about 2 or 3 minutes with the person next to you. And what kind of advice would you give them? All right? Go. Let's see what advice would you have for this couple? You would have some advice for them, right? Thank you, Dr. Relativism.
Adoption.
Okay. Seriously consider adoption. Would that be your, do you think that should be their first choice?
Well, I guess it depends how much finances contributes to what they feel.
Okay, let's assume just for this that money's not an object.
I don't know enough of the issues.
Okay, fair enough. That's okay.
Children that need loving families.
That's exactly right. Okay.
Yeah, something in this is kind of the issue with me too. I don't know all the options and everything, but I would talk to them in terms of what are the options that the doctor or whatnot gave you. Look at if any of them do actually fit into the biblical parameters.
Well, that's what she's asking you for.
Okay.
So which ones do?
So yeah, okay. So no, I would do basically the same.
Adoption.
Yeah.
Okay. So you would say no going down the technological road at all.
As far as I know, yeah.
Okay. All right.
I'm fairly ignorant to the infertility or to the in vitro, so I'm not sure that I'm speaking correctly on this. But I think what has to be addressed is they have to be educated on what, and I assume maybe they would come with an education from the doctor, but that could be really skewed biased, I'm assuming too. There's money involved there. But they need to understand what is being created here through this process. Is it one life? Is it multiple lives? Who's going to be responsible for the multiple lives if there are multiple lives?
All good questions, and I'm not sure there's a predictable answer at the very beginning. Now, they can tell you what kind of a thing they're creating, although that probably will be somewhat skewed also. But how many of them, in a lot of these technologies, is just impossible to say at the start. That's what makes them so challenging. Okay? Others?
Well, you could, obviously adoption is one option they have. Another option is simply to not have any kids.
Okay, remaining childless.
Remain childless, use their resources, their time, their energy, investing in other people,
Okay.
other parents
All right.
who have struggling.
Okay.
And then if they decide to move
That's
forward.
better than your to each his own
Yeah, I know.
earlier statement. So.
I'm learning already, see? Great teacher.
You are a quick study, my man.
And then if they were to kind of move forward with infertility services, you could suggest some principles that they could kind of keep
Okay.
in mind. So for example, we know the Scripture teaches that taking of innocent life is never permissible. So you say, look, any procedure that you would do should exclude the opportunity or the option of, say, sex selective abortion or terminating if you have like 4 human beings going inside you because of some infertility service.
Good.
Say, oh well, we're going to reduce 2 or 3 of
Okay.
that's
All right.
that's not possible.
Okay.
So just give us some principles.
Okay, broad general principles or parameters
Right.
as opposed to specific counsel. Okay, we'll at least do that. I think we can be a little more specific. I think there are some technologies that are out of bounds and some that are clearly on the table as a result of those principles. But it's, by and large, a good approach. Okay? Yes?
And isn't one thought, they've only been trying for 3 years, that, I don't know, do people always have children every 3 years? Or, how do they know that they're...
Okay, all right. How do they know that they're kind of at the end of the line trying naturally? That's a good question. Because usually, if you see an infertility clinic before you've been trying for a year, they'll probably tell you to come back later. Okay? 3 years is starting to get to be desperation time. And so they could continue to try naturally. That is certainly an option. They're starting to think that maybe we need this isn't working. We need to do something else. Okay? But granted, 3 years is not forever. But when you're trying to have a baby every month, 3 years, that's a long time. And they've probably had at least 2 years of at least 1 day a month when all hell breaks loose, right, emotionally for them. Okay. All right, anything else? Yes?
We talked about how we would counsel them to figure out what the root of their need for infertility or to go that route, and to help them spiritually in that way.
Okay, so what's sort of driving this in the first place? Okay, I think they might say something like, it's our God-given procreative constitution that's driving this, with a bit of exasperation at God for why this is taking so long. I mean, that's sort of the norm. Now, there may be other things driving that, and be a very, very good pastorally to get at that if you can. Right? Yes?
You might be able to figure out what is causing the infertility and administer drugs.
Okay, yeah. Now, I would say that's first. I mean, their physician probably told them that first thing anyway. So what they'll try to do is to figure out if there's any specific medical reason. And that will dictate which options are more on the table than others. About a third of all cases of infertility, though, is what, for lack of a better term, what we call mystery infertility, where there's no specific medical indication for why they can't get pregnant. Okay? But certainly, having the plumbing checked initially is a clear first step. Now, what would you say or ask or encourage this couple sort of spiritually and emotionally? What kinds of things would you want to ask them or say to them to minister to them spiritually?
Do they have a support group?
Do they have a support group? Probably not, because what you'll probably find is that most of their friends that are their similar age are multiplying like rabbits at the moment. And so chances are they've stopped going to baby showers, and they've probably stopped being invited to baby showers. I'm pretty sure they don't go to church on Mother's Day or Father's Day. And it's probably the case that Thanksgiving and Christmas can't get over fast enough. Okay, so that's a good question. Hard to say. But maybe one of the things you do as their friend is to put them in touch with couples who are on the other side of this, or other couples who are in the middle of this themselves. Okay? Good question, though. Okay? Yes?
No, this is kind of obvious, but just prayer for guidance.
Okay.
God
All right.
lead them in what direction and what He has planned for them.
Except they probably don't want guidance. They want conception.
Well, but guidance for whatever their plan or God's plan is going
Good.
to be for them on how
Okay,
they're going to
very
approach
good.
that for accepting,
Okay.
Whether it's adoption or being childless.
Okay, very good. It's prayer for the ability to accept whatever God has for them. Okay? Which may or may not be a child. Right? Now we'll come back to this. We've got to be really careful with that. Okay?
I would think spiritually, there's an assumption out there that because they're not conceiving or getting something that they desire. That
Excellent. Excellent. Very good point. That, what's wrong with me? What have I done to deserve it? Now that's theologically, that's perverted. To think of God as a punitive God like that. But you'd be surprised how frequently that emotion is felt. That I must have done something to merit this or demerit this. Okay? Maybe a better way to go about this would be to say, what are some things that you would not say to them? Or at least if you said this to them, you ought to duck. Okay? Is there sin in your life? Okay? That, I suspect you might take a step back from them after you say that. Now, certainly, theologically, infertility is a result of the general entrance of sin into the world, right? Infertility was not the way God originally intended it to be. I take it infertility is a malfunction of somebody's reproductive system, analogous to heart disease being a malfunction of the cardiac system, okay? Or other types of malfunctions. Okay? Caused by the general entrance of sin. Now, there may be cases where that's true. For example, we know medically that one of the side effects of virtually every sexually transmitted disease for women is an increase in the incidence of infertility, either through scarring of the uterus or blockage of the fallopian tubes. Okay? Now, that's not true for men, which is one of the great gender inequities. Okay? The other one is that men can sire children into their 70s. And I don't know why it's like that, but that is one of the gender inequities of life. Okay? But I'd be really careful how you say that, as though repenting will bring you fertility, which last time I checked, that's not necessarily true. Okay, but good. I would definitely stay away from that. Okay, what else? Somebody else? Yes.
I think even the first thing you saying being adoption can sometimes be
Absolutely right.
just harsh because
Absolutely
they're
right.
already feeling like there's something wrong and
Right.
they're pursuing this kind of avenue. It's their child.
Okay. That's a really good observation, because to use that as the default position feels like admitting defeat. And that there's a huge value in, quote, having a child of my own, which I don't think is all necessarily a bad or narcissistic thing. I think, again, that's part of our procreative constitution. That's a part of how God made us. Right? But going immediately to adoption is almost, with a couple hears that as saying, well, you might as well throw up the white flag and give up. Although, at the end of the day, that might be the best advice they'll get. Okay, what else? Yeah.
Maybe they're not meant to have kids.
Oh, don't. That's a dagger to the heart. Have you considered that God might not want you to have children? No, never once thought about that. Of course I've thought about that. Generally, what I found that means to the couple who says it is, thank God that it is you and not me that's suffering from this. That's often a way of just being callous to what people are feeling. Now, that you might be right about that. It may be that God doesn't intend for them to have children. That may be true. But generally, I would never suggest that unless I've had lots of time just hanging with them and praying and weeping with them, and they almost have to give you permission to say those kinds of things. Okay? Good point. What else? Anything else? That you shouldn't say?
I wasn't going to say this because it's not so theologically profound, but we wrestled with infertility for about 4 years ourselves, and a lot of times people come up and say to us, hey, look, just relax.
Just relax.
That's all it takes. You're just trying too hard. Just relax, and it'll come. And it's like, yeah, like you said, when that time of the month comes, and it's like, okay, game on. It's like you can't relax because it's the very thing that you're stressed out about. So practically, it wasn't a good.
No, that's terrible advice. And that's the callous thing too. I mean, that's just a platitude that somebody's throwing out there. In fact, what a lot of infertile couples will tell you is that after a while, sex just isn't any fun because it's all about conceiving a child. I mean, they'll talk about how, the husband will get a call at work saying, the window's open here, get home now. And, it's about as unromantic as you can find it. Okay? Sometimes they'll ask couples, well, when's the last time you took a romantic vacation? Or, I've actually heard some people ask, how much time do you spend in the hot tub?
Change your underwear.
Or change your underwear, yeah. Like this is anybody else's business. Right? But somehow, infertility gives people a reason to think they can ask those kinds of silly, personal questions. Okay? Here's the general guideline. Be really careful about saying or asking anything that will minimize the pain that these couples feel. Because the pain of infertility is off the charts. I'll give you an example. My wife and I wrestled with infertility for about 3.5 years. And she had a medical problem that wasn't specifically female related, but it was totally affecting her fertility. We got that fixed through pretty simple medication, and it was a neurological thing, and her neurologist predicted that her days of infertility were about to be over. And as it turned out, he was right. And we entered what I call the ranks of the frighteningly fertile at that point. And we had 3 boys without any problem after that. Okay? But I asked my wife this was about, a year or 2 ago, which experience was worse. In 2006, she had breast cancer with double mastectomy, full rounds of chemotherapy where she lost her hair, reconstruction, basically lost all her female parts. I remember I sat next to her on the edge of the bathtub as she was pulling clumps of her hair out. And I asked her, what was worse, breast cancer or infertility? And guess what she said? Without any hesitation, it was infertility. In fact, she said, by far, that was more painful. Okay? Part of the reason was that infertility affected not only her dream of having a child, but it also affected her gender identity. And we were caught almost completely off guard by how deep and how prolonged the pain of that was. And we quit going to church. Mother's Day and Father's Day were by far the two worst days of the year. I finally got my church on those 2 days to acknowledge infertility, which was huge. And we acknowledged it by saying, you know, these holidays are not, you know, we're not going to presume that these are celebrations for everybody, for a variety of reasons. I mean, you may have been abused by your mother. You know, your mother may have just recently died. You may want to be a mother and biology hasn't cooperated. We went through the whole litany of things. And I think short of losing a child, either after birth or in miscarriage, infertility is about as deep as the pain gets. And I'm sure that I said some of those dumb things to other infertile couples without realizing it. And it's not that this couple's friends are callous or insensitive intentionally. I think they realize that they just don't have a sense of how painful that is. Okay? So, sort of spiritually speaking, be really careful that you don't do anything or say things that will magnify the pain that they feel. Okay? There's a lot to be said for being with them, praying for them, asking, how can we be of help? Just being with them. That's it, without, sort of take the approach of Job's friends, before they start to speak. Right?
Yeah.
Just being with them.
Yeah.
Okay? So if you've been down that road yourself, or know someone who's been down that road, I suspect you're a little bit more in touch with how painful that is. Okay? Questions about that before we move along? Okay. All right. Let's think a little bit about what the options are that are available to this couple today. All right. Now I'll try to give you the latest sort of price figures on these two. It's been a while since I've masqueraded as an infertility patient to try to get an accurate read of what the prices are. And we'll talk about the ethics of that masquerade some other time. We won't deal with that now. Okay? First, and generally, what's attempted first, and we're going to assume here that there's no clear medical indication for why they can't conceive. Okay? First is what's called intrauterine insemination. We used to call this artificial insemination. That's really not the term we use for it anymore. Artificial insemination is generally the term we used when this is done with animals, but not with people. So intrauterine insemination generally is done with the husband's sperm, okay? Though it can also be done with donor sperm, either anonymous or named. Okay? See, in some parts of the world now, they are requiring that sperm donors be identified so that the child can track them if they want, which understandably has produced a plummeting decline in the availability of sperm donors. Okay? Now, frequently, what accompanies this are the high-powered multiple ovulation drugs that go with in vitro fertilization. Now, sometimes it's because the process is just cheaper. Sometimes it's medically indicated that way as well. But what will happen is the woman will have the high-potency fertility drugs that enable her to release multiple eggs per cycle, 5, 8, 10, 12, 15 or so eggs per cycle. But the eggs won't be harvested. Sometimes in order to save money, at that point they'll just do the artificial insemination. And so they'll bypass harvesting the eggs and fertilizing them in the lab and reimplanting, all that expense. But if you do the math on this, you have multiple eggs and a couple million sperm all together with no control at all over how many pregnancies result. Okay. Most of the time, this was not the case with Octomom. Octomom actually had IVF done in a really irresponsible way. But most of the time, when you have major multiples, 4 and above of children, this is the way it's done. Okay. I know we'll talk about the ethics of that in a little bit. Okay. You can also, intrauterine insemination can be done with donor sperm. What's analogous to that is egg donation, which is quite a bit pricier than sperm donation because there's substantially more involved in the process of procuring eggs than there is involved in procuring sperm. Okay, if you are on a college campus regularly, I would encourage you to look in the campus newspaper. You won't find these ads in the Chimes here, but you will find them in virtually every other college newspaper are ads soliciting egg donors and to a lesser degree surrogates, because college-age women are at the prime age to donate their eggs. And it's not uncommon for women to donate a harvest of their eggs in order to pay a year's worth of tuition for college. And there's a lot more risk to this than meets the eye. And
To the college girl?
to the donor, yeah. And I encourage you, there's a book, I forget who the author is, but it's entitled Confessions of a Serial Egg Donor. And the medical risks involved in that. We're going to show this here on campus probably later on in October. There's a new film that's just been produced called Eggs, E-G-G-S, Eggsploitation, which is about the egg donor industry. You can probably get a word on that it's called thecbc.org. It's the Center for Bioethics and Culture up in the Bay Area. Okay, stop me if there are questions on any of these, say so. IVF, it used to be that there was a whole family of technologies that resembled IVF, but those really aren't done very often anymore. The vast majority of infertility procedures in this family are technically IVF. GIFT was one that used to be done quite a lot, but it's just not done very often anymore. IVF is the main thing, where the eggs are harvested, fertilization takes place in the petri dish, and then they will implant usually anywhere from 2 to 6 embryos, depending on the woman's age. It's on a graded scale. The older the woman is, the more embryos they implant. Okay, so those are the general guidelines. Octomom had 6 embryos implanted and 2 of them split, and became identical twins, which is how she got 8 total. And I would suggest that Octomom was carrying a litter of children. And she's a good argument for why God did not intend women to carry litters. Then there are a variety of surrogacy arrangements, although there's really only a couple of these that are predominant today. Genetic surrogacy, or what's called traditional surrogacy, is actually not done very much today. And part of the reason for that is that the law in most states gives genetic surrogates maternal rights to her child. You may be familiar with the Baby M case from the late 1980s, where the couple who hired the surrogate who carried Baby M ended up pursuing her halfway across the country. Baby M's mother, really, which was her mother, asked if she could keep the baby for a week but before turning over custody to the couple who hired her. Why they allowed her to do that, I've never figured out. But she fled the state. She fled New Jersey and ended up in Florida. And the Florida State Police literally broke the door down of her place where she was staying in Florida and grabbed the baby out of her arms to take the baby back to the couple who hired her. And the New Jersey Supreme Court said there is something desperately wrong with this picture when, for one, you force a woman to give up her child because she signed a contract to do that. The court essentially said that contract is akin to, you and I going out and signing a contract that we're going to have a duel with pistols at 50 paces. If I back out of that, you can't sue me for breach of contract. Right? The court would say that's an inherently, intrinsically invalid contract, which is what they said about these surrogacy contracts. So the law has kind of done a number on genetic surrogacy. Most surrogacies today are what are called gestational surrogacies, where the surrogate does pregnancy and childbirth, but it has no genetic contribution to the child. Right? In fact, cases that would be much more easily handled medically by a genetic surrogate. Instead, what they're advised to do is get an egg donor and a gestational surrogate. I was with a couple in my church a while back where she's in her late 40s. And it would be, and she's done kind of having a child genetically related to herself. It would have been way simpler and way less expensive for them simply to have a genetic surrogate where her husband would inseminate artificially a surrogate. Okay? But the legal risk that the surrogate would keep her child, because she's rightly the mother of that child, was too much. And so they ended up probably paying an additional, my guess is probably an additional $10,000 to $15,000 to have an egg donor with the gestational surrogate, which is about 15 to 20 grand, plus the broker, which is another 20 grand, plus all the medical expenses, which is not covered by their insurance. That's probably another 10 grand. So I don't know if they're going to go ahead and do this, but they're probably in it for about $60,000 to do that. Okay? You understand why they would do that? Legally, it's just much safer under the law, because under the law, gestational surrogates have zero rights to the child that they are carrying. Yes?
As a rule, is it generally the surrogate mother is artificially inseminated, or is it ever really?
You mean the historic way?
Yeah.
Generally not.
Okay.
Every once in a while you hear these goofy stories
But
where
that's
that...
medically you do it artificially.
Yes. And in reality, for gestational surrogates, what other technology is required for a gestational surrogate? I'm sorry? IVF, yeah. Because eggs got to come from somewhere, sperm's got to come from somewhere, and they conceive in the lab, and you just implant embryos in the surrogate. Okay? Now, the vast majority of surrogacy arrangements are done for cash. The number of people who do this out of the goodness of their heart for a family member or a close friend is minuscule. Most people do this because they need the money. And today, interestingly, we are actually outsourcing surrogacy to the developing world. In fact, there are a handful of places in India that have become centers of what is becoming known as reproductive tourism, where you go and you hire a surrogate in India for about $2,500 to $3,000, which for those women is probably a year's pay. And it probably doesn't really matter if they are in tip-top physical health, as long as they're able to carry a child. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. But increasingly we are outsourcing this to other parts of the world where it's cheaper.
So if you're getting, and this child is essentially, when you're talking about an egg donor, 50% of the couple instead of 100%.
Right.
So where is that natural drive? Like, what would be the reason that somebody or a couple would want to do?
Why would a couple want to do an egg or sperm donor?
Yeah.
It's a good question. The reason is because for most of these couples, half a genetic connection is better than none at all.
Do you know if that becomes an issue?
It can. It can become an issue because there are, let's just say, it's probably more so for men. Men do not like to have what I call procreative pinch hitters for them. Okay? I said we'll talk about their case in more detail in a little bit, but I sat across the table some time ago with a couple for whom adoption was off the table. Okay? They said that up front. And he had the mumps when he was a kid and wasn't producing any sperm, and she was beating on him unmercifully to have a sperm donor. And it was real obvious that he didn't want to go there. But I suspect what happened, I really wanted to smack her, because when they started telling their story, she put it that we can't get pregnant. How'd she put it? We can't get pregnant, and it's his fault.
Wow.
And you think, wow. So we sort of, do not pass go, head straight for marriage counseling. But I suspect that what happened is that she coerced him into getting a sperm donor. And either he's a lot bigger man than I think he is, or he's going to have sort of a smoldering resentment that's going to be hard to deal with. That's not an unusual thing. Yeah.
And also to piggyback on that, the egg donor too, a lot of these women are older and their eggs aren't as good. And
Right.
That's where that 25 to 30%
That's right.
likeliness comes in.
Right.
And if they chose to do an egg donor from a 20-year-old,
Their chances go up dramatically.
a lot.
Mhm.
And a lot of doctors will guarantee it. Do it again.
That's right. In fact, some of these clinics do IVF with a money-back guarantee.
If they do that.
Right. But you got to follow all their rules, which takes, all the control of it out of the couple's hands. I had a Talbot couple a while back that they went to an infertility clinic in Minnesota, and they were promised 3 rounds of IVF from start to finish for $25,000. And if they didn't have a live birth at the end of those 3 rounds, they got all their money back. But if they conceived after the first try, all the extra money went to the clinic. So it was a calculated risk. But they lost the ability to say sort of what happens to their embryos in the process. That was a high price to pay, in my view. Okay? Yes?
Why would the clinic, or why would they want the eggs, like the embryos after that, or am I missing something?
Well, that's a good question. No, with IVF, a big part of the expense is the hormones to enable multiple ovulation. Okay? Plus, it's also really tough on the woman's body too. You don't. I mean, that's not something you want to do every month. And so, let's say that you go through all of that and don't get pregnant the first time. It's a lot easier and a lot less expensive to thaw out embryos that you have in storage as opposed to starting all over again. So it's primarily financial, but not totally, because there is concern about the well-being of the woman too. Yes?
Can you just clarify between the high-potency drugs that are used for IUI and for IVF? Before that.
They are the same thing.
Okay. So in both of those scenarios, there's like multiple eggs being released.
Yes, that's correct. Now, sometimes you'll do this without the fertility drugs. So if there's no real medical indication for the woman, then they won't take the risk. And increasingly, physicians won't do this with the IVF drugs unless the couple agrees in advance to selectively reduce the number of pregnancies to a safe level. All right, other questions on that? Okay. Okay, here, seems to me, here are the main issues that we want to address. This is where we'll go with the rest of our time tonight. First is basically the question, should this couple use any technological assistance? Right? That is, should the couple get on the technological train in the first place? Right? Sometimes the way this is phrased is, should we interfere in a natural process? Right? Now the answer to that I think is pretty easy, because as it's stated like that, because we interfere in all kinds of natural processes without a problem attached to it. I mean, we replace heart valves with pigs' heart valves, and pacemakers. Dialysis is interfering in a natural process. I mean, we do all kinds of things that interfere in natural processes. So basically what we're asking here is, should we employ any technological means to assist us in having a child? And if you are a consistent Roman Catholic, basically your answer to that question is no, we should not. And a couple caveats to that, but basically no. And if the answer to this is no, then we sort of close in prayer and go home really soon. But if the answer to that is yes, that it's okay to hop on the technological train, then the question becomes, at what point do we have to get off the train? And for a lot of people, where they get off is when it involves some sort of third-party contributor, a donor, or a surrogate. Okay? All right. Now this turns out theologically to be a very complicated question. All right, and we'll look at that after we take a break here in just a minute. Now, assuming here that the answer to this is yes, and then depending on how we answer this, then with IVF, whether it's with a donor or not, we have really big issues to deal with IVF. And that is what to do. It's probably not quite the right way to put the question. The best way to put it was how to avoid having leftover embryos, if that's possible. And then second, what to do with them if they are left over. So, at last count, there are in the United States, there are roughly 400,000 embryos in storage in infertility clinics. 400,000, as we would say, children on ice. Okay. Now, this is really complicated to get our arms around. This one is not as difficult. Because this, having to do selective reduction of the number of pregnancies, the need to have to do that can always be avoided. Okay. Now, whether it will be is another matter. Okay. All right, then the issues that have to do with surrogacy are a little bit different, because a surrogate is sort of a different kind of donor than a sperm or an egg donor. And so really the questions about surrogacy revolve around who's the mother here? Because in a genetic surrogacy, that's not hard to answer. The surrogate's the mother. But if the gestational surrogate doesn't contribute the egg, but she gives birth to the child, we've split motherhood traditionally in two. And which one of those takes priority? Or how to deal with a stalemate, if you agree that that's a stalemate, is really challenging to do. My own view of this is that I'm not totally convinced that the law handled this correctly. And I think this is one of those areas where a good argument can be made for the surrogate being the mother, but an equally good argument can be made for the woman who contributes the egg being the mother. And so we'll come to that too before the night's over. All right? So that's where we're going to head for the rest of the night. All right? Guys, game for that? Okay. Let me suggest it's probably a good place to take about a 10-minute break. When we come back, buckle up. It may get a little bumpy.
Biola University offers a variety of biblically centered degree programs, ranging from business to ministry to the arts and sciences. Visit biola.edu to find out how Biola could make a difference in your life.